I knew my father didn't love me the way a father should, but I never imagined he'd stand in front of hundreds of officers, point at me like I was a stranger, and call me a traitor. In that moment, something inside me cracked so sharply, I swear the whole room heard it. My name is Solene Mercer, and the day my father destroyed me in public was the day I learned the truth. Some betrayals don't come from enemies. They come from the people you once trusted to protect your life. I walked into the auditorium at Annapolis with the kind of polite confusion you carry when an invitation arrives without a reason. They said the ceremony was to honor silent contributions, whatever that meant, and I told myself it would be quick. Just slip in, sit down, shake a few hands, leave before old memories started breathing again. But the moment my name drifted through the speakers, a tightness gripped the center of my chest. I stepped forward only because that's what instinct demanded in rooms like this. Move when called. Don't question it. Don't falter. Light bounced off rows of medals and polished shoes, turning the space into something sharp, scripted, unforgiving. Then my father stood. He didn't rise slowly or thoughtfully. He shot up like a verdict already formed, like he'd been waiting for this precise second. His expression was carved from something colder than anger, something I couldn't place because I'd never seen it directed at me before. He pointed at me as if identifying a threat. The words that followed cut straight through the air. Everything inside me dropped, but I stayed where I was, fingers locked around the edge of the invitation that suddenly felt absurd in my hand. The whispers surged around me, curiosity, disbelief, judgment blending into a harsh hum I couldn't escape. Then a deeper voice sliced through it all. A 4-star Admiral stepped out from the front row, looked directly at my father, and spoke 3 words that stopped the entire room cold. I didn't understand them yet, but I knew my life had just fractured in a way that wouldn't be easily put back together. They moved me out of the auditorium with a silence so thick it felt rehearsed. No cuffs, no shouting, just the kind of rigid formality people use when they think they're escorting a problem they don't want to claim. The walk ended in a small room tucked inside one of Annapolis's oldest wings, barely 10 square meters, lit by a single fluorescent tube that hummed like it was losing patience. The young officer guiding me couldn't have been more than a few years into service. He kept his gaze fixed ahead, jaw tight, shoulders squared too perfectly to be natural. When he closed the door behind me, he hesitated, a small flick of uncertainty that crossed his face before he forced himself to turn away. For a second, I thought he might speak. Instead, he stepped into the hallway. A small click sounded by my boot. I looked down. A blank access card lay near my foot, its plastic edge still rocking from the fall. He didn't come back for it, didn't even slow his stride. He just walked faster, like leaving the card behind was the most dangerous thing he'd done in his career. I picked it up. No label, no initials, just a single black magnetic strip reserved for sealed archives and locked data rooms. Someone had slipped it to me on purpose. When I finally had a moment alone, I checked the activation timestamp embedded in the chip. My chest tightened when I saw it. Activated 2 hours before the ceremony, meaning someone inside the system already knew what was about to happen, maybe even helped ensure it did, and they wanted me to follow a trail they couldn't walk themselves. The clearance tied to the card led to a restricted wing at Newport Naval War College, a wing connected to the Okinawa breach. The same breach that swallowed my warning 24 hours before everything collapsed. Pieces shifted. A small, unwanted sense of clarity formed. This wasn't an accident. Someone had moved long before I'd even entered the room where my world shattered. Newport at night felt older than it looked in daylight. The data wing sat beneath the main building, behind layers of reinforced concrete and red warning signs posted like quiet threats. The corridor smelled of cold metal and dust, the kind that settles only in forgotten places. I swiped the card. The lock clicked open as if I belonged there. Rows of monitors lit the room with a sterile glow. I went straight to the Okinawa system logs, pulling up the timeline from the night the network collapsed. 03. 1726. S. Mercer Override Command. 317-12. ID missing. Admin access. My breath caught. The timestamps were inverted. Someone had manipulated the sequence to make it seem as though my login followed the deleted one. The missing ID meant the earlier user didn't just delete evidence, they erased themselves entirely, something only someone with deep administrative access could manage. I pulled at the fragments the system tried to bury, piecing together the ghost of a signature. When the recovered name appeared, my stomach dropped. Jonah Reeves. He'd been brilliant, steady under pressure. The last person I would have expected to see buried in a corrupted log. But he'd left abruptly months earlier, and his absence suddenly felt engineered, not voluntary. I opened the folder where my warning report should have been, empty. But the metadata told the real story. The file had been moved 4 hours before the attack, by someone with commander-level authority. 2 IDs, his and mine, woven into a narrative meant to frame us both. While the real hand stayed hidden behind the curtain, the screen's glow washed over my face as the truth settled. This wasn't my father's doing. This was the work of a system that needed a scapegoat, and it had chosen me. Leaving the data room at Newport felt like stepping out of a tunnel where every sound had been swallowed. I'd barely taken 3 steps into the main corridor when harsh lights flared to life above me, followed by the heavy cadence of boots hitting concrete. Collings appeared at the front of a formation, 6 military police flanking him in a tight V, each hand hovering near their weapons, as if they expected me to bolt. He spoke my name with the certainty of someone reading a verdict already stamped. Transfer to NCIS. Immediate custody. The kind of phrasing meant to erase a person before they understood what was happening. I lifted my hand slowly, not in surrender, but because clarity arrived with a sharpness that cut through panic. They weren't here to question me. They were here to silence me. A deeper voice rolled across the hallway before anyone could move. Durant stepped into view, the 4 stars on his shoulders catching the light like steel points. His presence alone shifted the air. MPs straightened instinctively. He announced I was under his supervision, and the hallway froze. Collings countered with mentions of higher orders, but Durant closed the space between them and reminded him exactly who outranked whom. When he leaned towards me, his words were a low warning meant for my ears only. They knew you entered Newport faster than I predicted. The realization hit hard. Someone was tracking me through people. Not cameras, someone with reach inside the system. Durant guided me down a separate corridor, deeper into a wing that felt carved out for secrets. The room he placed me in wasn't a cell, but the absence of signal, devices, and exits made the message clear. This was containment, not protection. He told me the person targeting me was the same man my father had trusted for 2 decades. My blood ran cold. Then he added he wasn't the only one who'd been watching over my career. And suddenly, the war I was in shifted shape, my father believing I had crossed a line, NCIS ready to lock me away, and a hidden hand capable of turning identities into weapons. Night inside the containment zone was too quiet. They gave me an offline terminal, no ports, no network, but memory was enough. I rebuilt every fragment from Newport, the reversed timestamps, the off-pattern command, Jonah's missing ID, my vanished warning file, the access card activated before the ceremony. Every piece pointed in a single direction. The door slammed open. Durant entered with 2 guards escorting Jonah. He looked pale, shaken, nothing like the analyst I remembered. His apology died in his throat before it formed. Durant shut the door and said Jonah wasn't the traitor, he was the tool. Jonah admitted Bennett had cornered him months earlier, pressuring him into signing what he thought was routine clearance. It wasn't. It gave Bennett full access to his identity. Enough to craft a perfect false trail. Durant displayed restricted files showing years of documents my father had signed, documents authored by Bennett. The truth hit like a slow punch. My father had been manipulated, not complicit. Then came the final blow, a renewed custody order filed by Collings, this time bearing my father's signature. The familiar handwriting felt like a blade. Staying meant disappearing. Leaving meant fighting the system. There was only one choice left. I had to get out. I had to expose Bennett, even if I had to do it alone. Durant told me I could stay hidden and blind inside the containment wing, or follow him into a place that didn't exist on any record. I didn't need convincing. The moment he unlatched the door, I stepped out into the night. We drove south until the cold Atlantic air thickened with salt. The abandoned relay station at Virginia Beach rose from the dunes like a rusted bunker, its steel door pitted by years of storms. Inside, everything smelled of damp concrete and forgotten electricity. Durant powered up the archive system, and we sifted through the Okinawa backups one file at a time. The first blow came fast. The unedited version of the override footage cut to static exactly 4 seconds before the operator turned toward the camera. Not a glitch precision erasure. Those missing frames held the face of the person who'd stolen my identity. Durant went hunting for residual data and unearthed a stray buffer fragment. Slowed down, the figure's posture crystallized tall frame, uneven shoulders, the flick of a wrist capped by a familiar watch. It was Bennett, and he was inputting commands using a pattern stolen from my own biometric profile. But the twist that hollowed my chest came from the corner of the screen. A second silhouette drifted behind him. My father, disoriented, asking something no one answered. He wasn't participating. He was being handled. The sensor logs confirmed it 2 civilians escorted him out. Not Navy personnel, contractors, people who operated beyond military oversight. Durant's voice dropped low. This isn't a rogue officer. It's a private pipeline built to control whoever it touches. He didn't need to say more. Washington was the only place the truth could land hard enough to matter. Durant stopped me before we left. My father hadn't signed off because he believed I was guilty. He'd signed because he thought someone was manipulating me the way they'd manipulated him. The realization hit painfully slow. Then callings came over the secured channel. A new custody order had been issued. When Durant opened the file, 2 signatures glared back Collings's and my father's. That meant Collings had chosen Bennett's side. Durant played a recording next my father's voice, strained, asking if the documents he was shown had been authenticated. A man answered with confidence, but his language, tone, and procedure were wrong. A staged briefing. My father had been cornered. We barely made it off the coastal road before a dark SUV locked onto our tail. Civilian plates. Contractor pursuit. Bennett already knew what we'd uncovered. Durant veered through back routes until we reached a weather-beaten cabin near the Chesapeake Marsh. Inside, he opened a dust-coated trunk and revealed a red file marked Project Hermes. Every page mapped how officer biometrics were harvested, forged, weaponized. Mine included not because I was suspected, but because I was efficient. Durant closed the file slowly. Bennett didn't want to frame you. He wanted to own you. Cold certainty settled through me. I wasn't running anymore. I was preparing for war. Washington lay under a veil of pale morning fog as I walked into the Naval Council chamber, carrying 2 things: the Hermes file and the kind of truth that could fracture a 30-year wall of silence. My father sat rigid near the front, his expression carved from something older than anger. Collings hovered beside him, stiff and uneasy. Bennett waited farther back, composed in a way that made the room feel colder. Durant stood at my side like a fixed pillar. When the council chair asked for my statement, I unlocked the Hermes box. Conversations died instantly, as if the air itself braced for impact. Durant loaded the Virginia Beach footage onto the main screen. At first, the familiar frames played the override sequence, the ghostly movements. Then the recovered buffer stitched in. Bennett appeared clearly, shoulders uneven, fingers striking keys with the same cadence recorded in my biometric file. And behind him, for half a second, my father crossing the room without comprehension in his eyes. Collings shot to his feet, protesting. Durant's voice thundered back, announcing the footage came from an off-system backup Bennett couldn't reach. The temperature in the chamber seemed to spike. Then Bennett stood. Instead of denying anything, he admitted to engineering the mimic. He spoke about my skill set as though discussing a tool he once owned, dismissing the wreckage he'd left in his wake. My father slammed a hand onto the table, his voice trembling with outrage as he finally saw the shape of the trap he'd been pulled into. Bennett turned his cold logic on him, calling him a willing participant, clinging to family honor. The accusation drained the color from my father's face. Durant stepped forward, looked directly at him, and delivered 3 steady words that silenced the entire chamber. My father froze, as if struck. Security moved in on Bennett. I exhaled for the first time in months. Victory didn't feel triumphant. It felt like the end of something I could never return to. Bennett was taken into custody before the chamber doors even finished closing behind him. The fallout spread fast. NCIS and JAG launched a full-scale investigation. that reached into every shadow he'd operated from Project Hermes, contractor networks, altered databases, and the falsified signatures he'd woven into my biometric pattern. They pulled every document my father had signed over 2 decades, examining each line with a scrutiny sharp enough to cut steel. Calling slipped out of the room without meeting a single pair of eyes. I watched his shoulders fold inward as he walked away. A man already grieving the career he'd sacrificed to the wrong loyalty. There was no satisfaction in seeing him fall. Only a tired ache, the kind that settles after too many battles fought too close to home. When I finally stepped outside, the air felt thinner, almost weightless, but beneath that lightness was an ache I couldn't shake. Truth had won. Yes, but truth always left burn marks. It never returned what had already been lost. That evening, Durant called me into his small office overlooking the Potomac. The room felt warmer than the council chamber had, softer somehow, as if the walls recognized relief when they saw it. Durant regarded me with a look that balanced respect and concern. He told me my name had been cleared, my record restored, my honor intact. Then he asked the question he'd been carrying all day. Was I certain I wanted to leave the Navy? The lights of Washington shimmered on the river outside the window, shifting with the current like a reminder that nothing stays still forever. I felt the truth settle quietly inside me. I told him I had served long enough, and staying would only turn me into the construct Bennett once tried to mold: useful, predictable, owned. Durant nodded slowly, not arguing, not persuading, just understanding. I signed the papers without hesitation. There was no anger left, no bitterness, only the steady certainty of a door closing exactly when it needed to. And for the first time in years, the future felt wide open. I arrived in Portland with the kind of quiet exhaustion that settles in your bones after too many months of surviving instead of living. The train rolled past rows of weather-beaten houses and gray water that stretched all the way to the horizon. My mother once dreamed of moving here, somewhere calm enough for a person to hear their own thoughts. I used to think she romanticized it. But standing on the pier that first week, watching the lighthouse blink against the early evening fog, I realized she had simply known a truth. I was only just beginning to learn some places give you permission to breathe again. I found an old brick warehouse near the working docks, a forgotten structure with peeling paint and windows clouded by years of salt wind. To anyone else, it looked like a building at the end of its usefulness. To me, it looked like possibility. I spent days gutting it, sanding down the worn floorboards, fixing the heating, turning abandoned space into something functional. By the time I hung the sign out front, Veterans Cyber Support and Transition Center, it felt like a piece of my past had finally been reshaped into something good. People trickled in slowly. A discharged technician who'd been blamed for a system failure he didn't cause, a former communications officer whose clearance had been quietly revoked, a civilian analyst burned out from years of quiet service no one recognized. We gathered around a long wooden table lit by mismatched lamps, drank strong coffee, and let our stories spread out across the room like maps of old battlefields. None of us needed to impress anyone. None of us were hiding anymore. One late afternoon, as the winter light faded into a soft steel blue haze, the bell on the front door rang. Just once, soft, cautious. I knew instantly who stood on the other side. My father filled the doorway, but this time he looked smaller. No uniform stiffening his posture. No medals weighing on his chest. No rank shielding him from his own humanity. His eyes were tired. The kind of tired that comes from confronting truths you spent decades avoiding. He told me he had spent years believing he was protecting me, when all he had really done was protect the image of himself he wanted the world to see. He said the hardest part of the investigation wasn't discovering what Bennett had done, but realizing how easily he'd been steered into hurting the person he was supposed to defend. I told him I didn't need his pride. I only needed him to see me clearly, without fear or expectation. For the first time in my life, his shoulders dropped not in defeat, but in release. He nodded, as if acknowledging not just me, but the years we'd both lost. That night, I walked to the shoreline. The ocean was dark, almost black. with only the faint lights of distant ships breaking through. The wind whipped hard against my jacket, carrying the cold straight through me, but I didn't turn away. Instead, I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply. For the first time in 20 years, the breath felt like it belonged entirely to me. I wasn't a file in a classified system. I wasn't the shadow of Richard Mercer. I wasn't the echo of Okinawa. I was simply Solene, and at last, I was free.